My only child stood before our entire leadership team and declared me obsolete. The words didn't just hang in the air, they shattered the very foundation of my identity, an identity I had spent 30 years building alongside the man I loved. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I remember the strange, hyper-focused sensation of my own breathing, the weight of the pen in my hand. I simply closed my leather-bound notebook, the soft, final click of the pen echoing in the dead silence, and I stood. I walked out of that boardroom, past the faces of people I'd celebrated birthdays with, people I'd consoled through personal tragedies. I drove straight to the airport, my hands perfectly steady on the wheel while my entire world collapsed into rubble inside my chest. At the terminal, I bought a one-way ticket to a city where I was nobody's mother, nobody's widow, only the architect of my own destiny. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. To truly understand the depth of that betrayal, I need to take you back, not just to the beginning of the end, but to the very beginning. My husband, Charles, wasn't just my rock, he was the other half of my brain. We were a perfect, symbiotic partnership. He was the visionary, the big-picture dreamer who could see opportunities on the horizon. I was the architect, the one who could take that vision and build the foundation, the walls, the very plumbing to make it a reality. We started Prestige Dynamics with a single client and a second-hand printer in our garage. 4 years, we worked side by side, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in each other. We didn't just build a company, we built a legacy. Our son, Michael, grew up in that environment. He was our greatest joy. I remember him doing his homework at the conference table, the smell of pizza and ambition filling the air. Charles's sudden heart attack at 58 didn't just leave me a widow, it was an amputation. It left a gaping, hemorrhaging hole in a company that was our third child. Michael was 31 then, armed with a prestigious MBA and an air of impatient entitlement that, in my grief-stricken state, I mistook for capable confidence. The board, eager for stability and seeing a younger, male version of his father, practically pushed him into the interim CEO role. I was drowning, barely able to remember to eat, let alone fight a corporate coup. So, I let it happen. I told myself he was stepping up, that this was what Charles would have wanted. But the signs of my erasure were there, subtle at first, then brazen. The weekly executive summaries, which had landed on my desk without fail for 15 years, suddenly stopped. My suggestions in strategy meetings were met with a patronizing, "We've got it handled, Mom, don't worry your pretty little head." He started referring to my office, the one with the north-facing light Charles had insisted I take, as the corner office, and my most loyal clients as the legacy accounts. I was being systematically, deliberately erased, and in my fog of sorrow, I was a willing accomplice to my own demise. The day of the fateful board meeting is etched into my memory with the painful, crystalline clarity of a trauma. Michael had personally asked me to attend what he called a forward-looking strategic session to redefine our future. I dressed with immense care that morning, choosing the navy blue suit Charles had bought me for our 25th anniversary, hoping somehow to feel his strength woven into the fabric. I walked into that room, a room I had personally designed to foster collaboration and open dialogue, and felt the temperature drop by 10 degrees. Our CFO, a man named David I'd hired when he was a green junior analyst terrified of his own shadow, suddenly found the intricate pattern of the Persian rug utterly fascinating. Sarah, our head of HR, who I'd considered a close friend, offered a weak, pained smile that didn't reach her eyes. And Michael. He stood at the head of the table, not in his father's worn, comfortable chair, but in a new, intimidatingly tall, black leather throne he'd apparently bought for himself. He launched into a slick, soulless PowerPoint presentation filled with the hollow jargon I despise: synergy, pivoting, disrupting the legacy model. For 20 agonizing minutes, he talked about cutting fat, streamlining for efficiency, and shedding the skin of the past. He spoke about the company as if it were a burden he had inherited, not a treasure he had been entrusted with. Then he clicked to the final slide. It was a simple, brutal list. The header read, "Resource reallocation, non-essential personnel." And at the very top, in bold, accusatory 24-point font, was my name. Elizabeth Lockwood. He looked right at me, with a coldness I never knew my sweet, gap-toothed boy possessed, and said the words that would define the rest of my life. It's time the company cut its dead weight. Starting with my mother. There was a collective gasp, followed by a few nervous, complicit chuckles from the sycophants already jockeying for position in his new regime. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The thick, suffocating fog of grief that had enveloped me for months lifted instantly, burned away by a crystalline, sharp, and utterly focused fury. The old Elizabeth, the pleaser, the peacemaker, would have stood up and listed every client she'd landed, every crisis she'd averted, every midnight oil she'd burned. But that woman was gone, incinerated in the heat of that betrayal. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the plush carpet. I looked slowly at each board member, making a silent, mental note of who met my gaze with shame and who looked away with cowardice. I walked to the door, the click of my heels the only sound in the tomb-like silence. I turned the brass knob, then paused, looking back at my son one last time. "Michael," I said, my voice so calm and steady it surprised even me. "I truly hope the weight of this decision feels lighter than the weight of my absence will prove to be." And then I left. I didn't go to my office to collect my things. I didn't say goodbye to my assistant. I walked straight to the elevator, straight to my car, and I never, ever looked back. I had 4 hours before my flight to Nashville departed. 4 hours to dismantle a 40-year life. The house I returned to was a tomb, filled with the ghosts of a happiness that now felt like a lie. Charles's favorite reading chair still held the gentle indentation from his body. The family photos on the mantel showed a smiling, accommodating woman I barely recognized, a woman who had made herself smaller to make everyone else feel bigger. I didn't have the energy for nostalgia. I went upstairs and packed 3 suitcases. That was it. The sum total of what I wanted to take from my old life. I left the expensive jewelry, the curated art collection, the fragile china. I took my clothes, my laptop, my personal files, and a single, faded picture of Charles and me on our wedding day, our faces full of a hope that felt like a different lifetime. Then, I got to work. My first call was to Eleanor, my most loyal lieutenant and the only person in that room who had looked truly, physically ill with shame. She answered on the first ring, her voice a frantic whisper. "Elizabeth, my God, are you okay? What just happened?" "Eleanor, I need you to listen to me very carefully and not ask questions," I said, my voice all cool, detached business. "I need a full, unredacted copy of the entire client database, with all historical notes, contact histories, and project postmortems." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her internal struggle. "Elizabeth, that's corporate property. Michael would have my head. He'd fire me on the spot." "Eleanor," I said, my tone dropping into something low and uncompromising. "I held your hand through your devastating divorce. I promoted you to VP when every other man in that room said you weren't ready. I am not asking you to steal state secrets. I am asking you to return what is rightfully mine, the relationships and institutional knowledge I built over 2 decades. The silence stretched, thin and tight, and then I heard the decisive clack of her keyboard. "Give me your personal email address. You'll have it in 10 minutes. Next, I called my private banker, Thomas. He'd been with us for 15 years and knew the family dynamics better than any therapist. "Thomas, I need you to liquidate my entire personal investment portfolio and transfer all assets to a new, private account at a different institution, one with no ties to Prestige Dynamics. I also need you to remove Michael as a signatory on everything, safety deposit boxes, trusts, everything, effective immediately." He was stunned into silence for a moment. "Elizabeth, the market is down nearly 15% from its peak. And to make such a drastic, permanent move so soon after Charles, perhaps it would be prudent to wait. Grief can cloud our judgment." "Thomas," I said, my voice firm and leaving no room for negotiation. "I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. If you cannot execute these instructions immediately and without further commentary, I will be on the phone with your competitor within the hour." He processed every single transfer that very afternoon. With the brutal practicalities handled, I did something purely for my soul. I went to a boutique I'd always admired but never shopped in, and I bought an entirely new wardrobe. No more conservative, invisible suits. I bought bold, emerald green dresses, elegant silk blouses in colors that screamed for attention, and a buttery soft leather jacket that made me feel powerful and untouchable. The shop assistant, a woman my age with wonderfully kind eyes, asked, "Big event to go to?" I looked at my reflection in the mirror, a stranger staring back with a glint of steel in her eyes, and I smiled a real, genuine smile for the first time in months. A rebirth, I said. By 7 p.m., I was at SeaTac Airport with 3 suitcases and a first-class ticket to Nashville. I chose it not at random, but with deliberate intent. I needed its energy, its heart, its music, its palpable sense of life, a universe away from the sterile, rain-soaked tech world of Seattle. As the plane ascended, pushing through the clouds, I watched my old life, my old self, shrink away into a meaningless grid of lights beneath me. My phone, now a relic from that past life, buzzed incessantly on the seat beside me. Calls from Michael. Then texts. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Where are you? Come back so we can talk about this like adults. Eleanor told me what you did. Taking those files is theft, Mom. I could press charges." I didn't feel a flicker of anger or guilt. I felt nothing. I simply picked up the phone, held down the power button, and watched the screen go black. The greatest freedom, I discovered in that moment, is not in having everything, but in the moment you finally stop carrying the crushing weight of other people's expectations. The 3-hour flight became my cocoon, a sacred space between lives. I opened my laptop, and for the first time, I began my research not for prestige dynamics, but for myself. I saw that Nashville's economy was booming, but I spotted a crucial gap in the market. There were plenty of startups with brilliant, world-changing ideas but absolutely no operational discipline. There were established, family-owned small businesses that were beloved but struggling to scale beyond their local roots. They all needed someone who could build the engine, not just admire the chassis. I spent the entire flight crafting a detailed business plan, a tiered service menu, and 5-year financial projections. By the time the pilot announced our descent into Nashville, Lockwood Consulting was no longer a desperate fantasy. It was a detailed, actionable blueprint for my future. My first few weeks in Nashville were a surreal blend of sheer terror and intoxicating exhilaration. I found a sleek, modern apartment in a high-rise with a breathtaking view of the city skyline, a deliberate and symbolic contrast to my traditional, suburban Seattle home. My real estate agent, a force of nature named Brenda with a laugh that could power a small town, saw right through my corporate facade. "Let me guess," she'd said, looking over my financial statements without a hint of surprise. "Corporate escapee. We get a lot of you here." Nashville has a way of calling to people who've forgotten the sound of their own heartbeat. It was Brenda, with her uncanny intuition, who made the first, pivotal introduction. "I know a kid," she told me over coffee. "He's a goddamn genius, but his business is a beautiful, high-tech disaster. He's drowning, and honey, I think you're the only life raft tough enough to pull him out." That kid was Jason, the 28-year-old founder of Nexus Apps. He was a coding prodigy who had secured $8 million in venture capital funding but was burning through it at a rate that would make a lottery winner blush. His office was a glorious chaos of empty pizza boxes, energy drink cans, and whiteboards covered in complex, incomprehensible diagrams. "They say you can fix anything," he said, his eyes wide with a mixture of desperate hope and utter exhaustion. I didn't just look at his spreadsheets. I spent 2 full days embedded with his team, watching how they worked, how they communicated or failed to. I listened to the sales calls, sat in on the developer stand-ups. The problem wasn't the quality of their product, which was exceptional, it was the complete and total lack of structure surrounding it. They were literally losing money on every single sale because they had no concept of true cost accounting or resource allocation. I laid it out for him with unvarnished honesty. "Jason, you have 3 core problems. 1. Your project management is pure anarchy. 2. You're mistaking frantic activity for measurable achievement. 3. And most critically, you have a CFO who is really just a glorified bookkeeper with a fancy title and no power." I then presented him with a phased, 60-day rescue plan, implement a proper agile project management system, introduce rigorous activity-based costing, and begin an immediate executive search for a real, battle-tested chief financial officer. "My rate," I told him, watching his face carefully, "is $400 an hour." He didn't even blink. He just shoved a contract across the table and said, "When can you start?" "Tomorrow." That first project became my grueling, exhilarating proving ground. I was working out of my new apartment, often until 2 a.m., building the very systems and processes I was recommending to him. It was exhausting and utterly thrilling in a way I hadn't felt in 20 years. When we finally implemented the new costing model, we discovered Jason's company was undercharging for their services by a staggering 40%. Within 3 months, Nexus Apps went from a cash inferno to being profit neutral. By month 6, they were decisively, sustainably in the black. Jason was so ecstatic and relieved he became my unofficial, and incredibly vocal, spokesperson, singing my praises to anyone who would listen in Nashville's tight-knit business community. The floodgates opened after that. Suddenly, my phone wasn't just ringing, it was buzzing off the hook with referrals. A local craft brewery, beloved but chaotic, needed help scaling their distribution without losing their soul. A boutique marketing agency with brilliant creatives was struggling with client retention and profitability. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I hired my first employee, Chloe, a sharp, impossibly organized recent business school graduate who could manage my calendar and clients with a preternatural calm that belied her age. We quickly moved out of my apartment and into a bright, open-plan office with exposed brick in the trendy Gulch neighborhood. I then hired 2 more senior consultants, Ben, a former supply chain guru who was tired of the soul-crushing bureaucracy of a Fortune 500 company, and Maria, a brilliant data scientist who could find the compelling story hidden within any labyrinthine spreadsheet. We were a team of talented misfits, all undervalued and underestimated in our previous lives, and together, we were utterly unstoppable. The revenue was more than just money, it was visceral, tangible validation. In our first full fiscal year, Lockwood Consulting generated more net profit than my 30% share of Prestige Dynamics had ever paid in dividends. Every single dollar was mine, earned purely through my own intellect, grit, and reputation. We celebrated our first-year anniversary at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, toasting our success with expensive champagne. Chloe, now my right hand, looked at me and asked the question I'd been asking myself. Elizabeth, be honest. Do you ever miss it? Seattle? Your old life? I thought about it, truly let myself feel the ghost of that past. I miss the ghost of the woman I thought I was supposed to be, I said finally. The one who believed her value was tied to being a wife and a mother. But I love the woman I actually became. The one who knows her value is inherent. As the words left my mouth, my phone buzzed on the table between us. A text from an unknown Seattle number. Mom. Heard about Lockwood Consulting from a colleague. We need to talk. It's urgent. Michael, I turned the screen to show Chloe. Her eyes widened, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. Well, she said dryly. The prodigal son returns. What are you going to do? I picked up the phone, read the message one more time, and then turned it face down on the table. I'm going to let him wait, I said, taking a sip of champagne. A little anticipation is good for the soul. It builds character. He didn't wait long. He showed up at my office 2 weeks later, unannounced and uninvited. The transformation was shocking. The arrogant, perfectly polished executive was gone. In his place was a man frayed at the edges. His suit was rumpled, there were dark, bruised circles under his eyes, and he carried the tense, jittery energy of a man standing on the very edge of a cliff. Nice place, he said, trying and failing to sound casual as his eyes darted around my office, lingering on the skyline view that was now mine. To what do I owe this surprise visit, Michael? I asked, not offering him a seat, forcing him to stand like a supplicant. He finally crumbled, the facade shattering. We've lost the Morrison account. And Tectonic. And Global Synapse. These were my legacy clients, the ones I'd personally nurtured and grown for over a decade. They're all saying the same thing. They want to work with you. Their new management read about your work with Nexus Apps in a business journal and they don't think we can deliver that level of sophistication anymore. They think we're outdated. He took a shaky breath and proposed his solution, the one he'd clearly been rehearsing on the flight down, a partnership. Lockwood Consulting would merge with a flailing Prestige Dynamics. We're family, Mom, he pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. We should be building this legacy together, not competing against each other. It's what Dad would have wanted. I let the silence stretch, thick and heavy, making the spacious office feel claustrophobically small. When I was lost and drowning after your father died, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, did you want to build with me, Michael? Or did you want to build over me? Did you want my counsel, or just my chair? I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my city, the city that had given me a second chance. I have a business to run, Michael. I have employees who depend on me. If you're serious about getting help, you can speak to Chloe. She handles all new client inquiries and our standard contracting. The shock on his face was palpable, a satisfying blend of disbelief and humiliation. You're treating me like a client. I turned and looked at him, my expression perfectly neutral, a mask of pure professionalism. Michael, I said, walking to my office door and pulling it open. That's exactly what you are. The only question that remains is whether you'll be a successful one. He signed the standard consulting agreement 3 weeks later. The look on his face as he initialed each page, explicitly agreeing to my $500 an hour rate and strict net 15 payment terms, was a moment of pure, unadulterated victory. I flew back to Seattle for the first time since my exile, and walking into the Prestige Dynamics office felt like walking onto the deck of a ghost ship. The vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a pall of fear and defeat. The plants were wilting from neglect. The employees who were left, the true believers, looked at me with a mixture of desperate hope and profound shame. Eleanor, my old friend, pulled me into a windowless conference room the moment I arrived. Elizabeth, it's so much worse than he let on, she whispered, her face pale. He took out an $800,000 loan against the company's assets last year to fund some grandiose, ill-conceived marketing push that never even launched. And he personally guaranteed it. My blood ran cold. A personal guarantee meant he had bet his house, his savings, his entire financial future on his own hubris. But the real, devastating blow came later, when I started digging into the corporate records with my lawyer. In his haste and arrogance 2 years ago, during his coup, Michael had never filed the final paperwork with the state to officially remove me as a shareholder. Legally, in the eyes of the law, I still owned 30% of Prestige Dynamics. My lawyer, a brilliant and ruthlessly logical woman named Patricia Chen, confirmed my worst nightmare. He structured this loan with a sneaky little clause called successor liability. Elizabeth, she explained, pointing to the dense legalese. It means if the company defaults and ownership is transferred to a family member within 5 years of the loan origination, that person automatically assumes the debt. He's essentially set a financial trap for you. He's set you up to be personally responsible for his failure. The cold, calculating nature of that betrayal was infinitely worse than the public humiliation. This wasn't just about pushing me out, it was about ensuring my financial destruction if he fell. It was a contingency plan of pure spite. I confronted him in his office, the loan documents laid out on his desk between us like a declaration of war. Explain this to me, Michael. Explain why I am still listed as an owner, and why this loan is designed to ensnare me. All the bluster and arrogance left him in a rush. He deflated, shrinking into his expensive suit. He looked like a scared little boy who'd been caught in a lie. I thought if things got bad enough, you'd have to come back and fix it, he mumbled, unable to meet my eyes. I never thought it would actually get this far. I never thought I could actually fail. You thought you could bankrupt me into submission? I said, my voice quiet, cold, and dangerously level. The next day, with Patricia's guidance, I executed my power play. Using my still valid 30% ownership stake and the evidence of his gross mismanagement, I forced a reverse merger. I didn't just come back as a consultant, I took over. Lockwood Global was born, with me as the majority shareholder and CEO. The $800,000 debt was now my problem to solve, but the power, the absolute control, was unequivocally and finally mine. The rebuild of Prestige Dynamics was the hardest, most emotionally draining thing I have ever done. It wasn't just about restructuring debt and winning back clients, it was about surgically removing a culture of fear and incompetence and transplanting a new heart of accountability and excellence. The most difficult part was retraining Michael. I had to break down everything he thought he knew about leadership. It was a brutal process for both of us. I made him sit silently in the back of client calls where I had to personally salvage relationships he had arrogantly damaged. I made him redo financial models and business projections over and over until they were not just good, but perfect. There were shouting matches that echoed through the office. There were tears of frustration from him, and moments of sheer exhaustion for me. But slowly, painstakingly, The entitled CEO began to transform into a humble, attentive student. He began to ask questions instead of giving orders. He started to listen, truly listen, to what clients and employees were actually saying. 6 months later, we stood side by side on the stage of a major industry conference, announcing the successful merger of Lockwood Consulting and Prestige Dynamics into Lockwood Global, and presenting our record-breaking quarterly results. The audience of our peers erupted in applause, but the real victory, the one that truly mattered, was the quiet, hard-earned respect I saw in Michael's eyes when he looked at me. Later that evening, in my office, his father's old office, now mine again, he finally broke. The walls came down completely. "I was wrong about everything, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, tears welling in his eyes. "I was so terrified of failing, of not being the man Dad was, that I tried to destroy the one person who could have taught me how to succeed. I am so sorry." I looked at my son, not as the villain of my story anymore, but as a deeply flawed, scared man who had been given the most brutal and necessary education of his life. "Michael," I said softly, pouring him a glass of water. "Your worst decision, as painful as it was, forced me to become the best, strongest version of myself. You didn't bury me that day in the boardroom. You planted a seed in concrete, and I had to grow strong enough to break through it. He still works for me. He's the COO of Lockwood Global now, and he's a good one, because he earned it. He learned it from the ground up. And I am still the CEO, running the empire that was built from the ashes of my humiliation. They called me dead weight. They laughed at me. But they didn't understand the fundamental law of physics and of life. That dead weight, when repurposed with intention and strength, becomes the unshakable foundation of something truly magnificent. It's the ballast that keeps the skyscraper standing tall and unyielding through the strongest storm. If this story of resilience, betrayal, and rebuilding your life from the ground up resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the Revenge by Her channel. We have so many more powerful stories of transformation to share with you.